Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, and thank you for joining us. My name is Melissa Dano, and I am the Dietetic Internship Director at the UTHealth Houston School of Public Health. Today, our topic is Summer Bites and Family Delights, Easy Recipes for Kids at Home. Today's webinar is presented by the Nourish Program at UTHealth Houston School of Public Health. The Nourish Program shows people how to grow, prepare, and promote food that encourages lifelong health and well-being through hands-on, evidence-based classes taught across our garden, kitchen, clinic, and community. The Dietetic Internship at UTHealth Houston works closely with the Nourish Program. The internship is where public health and culinary medicine meet clinical care. You can visit our website to find out more information by using that QR code, or you can send us an email. Additionally, today's webinar is hosted by the Michael and Susan Dell Center for Healthy Living at the UTHealth Houston School of Public Health. Thank you to the center staff for providing support for this webinar. The center's vision is healthy children in a healthy world, with a mission to advance health and healthy living for children and families through early and impactful interventions. The slides and recording of today's webinar will be archived on the center's website, msdcenter.org. If you have any questions during the presentation, please enter them into the Q&A box during the session, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. All right, well, we hope you all feel welcomed. We're going to go over our agenda quickly. So today we're going to discuss the following. We're going to talk about why cooking matters for kids. We'll have our recipe demo, which is live cooking. We'll discuss some quick tips and kitchen safety, and we'll have our Q&A session. We have some learning objectives for you. So what we want to do is promote healthy eating habits in children, empower families to cook together, understand the importance of culinary engagement, share practical seasonal recipes, and demonstrate how to prepare simple, nutritious meals using seasonal ingredients. And I have a sneak preview of our recipes here. So we'll make some family-friendly veggie sliders that won't weigh you down in the summer heat. We'll have some summer pasta, which is hydrating and refreshing, in our cheesy zoodles. And then we have the strawberry and Greek yogurt bar, which is a nice cold and sweet treat that you can actually prepare in 2 different ways. So with that, I'm excited to introduce our speaker, Dolores Woods. She's a nutritionist supervisor with the Nourish Program at UTHealth Houston School of Public Health. She holds a Grand Diplôme in Culinary Arts from the French Culinary Institute in New York City and a Master's in Food Studies from New York University. She began her career in fine dining and culinary education, later expanding her expertise through the Coordinated Dietetics Program at California State University, Los Angeles. With a passion for food and nutrition, Dolores has worked across diverse areas, including culinary medicine, gestational diabetes, child nutrition programs, and university food service. She is deeply committed to teaching others about food and empowering individuals and communities to lead healthier lives through informed, enjoyable eating. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dolores, and she's going to show you how to make some amazing recipes. Dolores, take it away. We can't hear you.
Okay, sorry about that.
There we go.
There we go. Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. Today we're going to be preparing really simple recipes with easy to find ingredients so that you could be, cooking at home, hopefully get some inspiration, especially if you are cooking with kids. These are kid-friendly recipes, and we're going to show you how you can incorporate different age kids at the different stages of each recipe. So to start with, I really just want to talk about some of the ingredients that we're going to be using today, starting with the zoodles. So zoodles have been pretty popular within the last few years, and it's such a great way to get some more vegetables into our diets. This zucchini, it's such a great vegetable, especially during the summertime. They're everywhere, and sometimes if you grow zucchini at home, you know that there's more than you know what to do with. So I'm going to just make a really easy zucchini noodle dish with some Parmesan cheese and some basil. Really fresh. Again, the zoodles are really hydrating. Zucchini especially is mostly water, so just a great vegetable to have on hand. The first thing I'm going to do is use a spiralizer. There are so many different spiralizers out there on the market. If you have one already, you may see something that looks like this. There are some electric ones, some really fancy ones that have different types of attachments, but this is really simple. It's inexpensive, and what I like about it is that, older kids can use something like this to help you out in the kitchen. The first thing that I'm going to do is just trim my zucchini. I did wash it, and I'm going to trim the ends off. And with this particular spiralizer, what I like to do is use the thicker end, just because there's going to be less waste at the end, and I'll explain why. The other thing with this is that I do like to place this on my cutting board, and I'm just going to apply some pressure, but you just lean it on the cutting board and the spiralizer does all of the work for you. Now, they do sell frozen zucchini noodles, so you can see here how it's separating, but part of the fun is really being in the kitchen, getting your hands dirty. And so again, if you want to do this on your own or let some of the older kids do this, this is just something that's fun. It does require some pressure, which is why I think it's better for some of the older kids to do. And it's important for kids to be in the kitchen because it actually helps them with their independence, it builds confidence, and it also encourages healthy eating habits. So really important to give them some tasks that they can do. So I'm just, you can see, separating these, and then I'm going to put them in a bowl with some that I already have. The other interesting thing about this spiralizer is that it sort of separates that core. The core usually comes out through the middle, which is full of seeds, and I actually don't want this. It's a little bit too watery, so I'm going to remove that and just continue with this. You don't want really long strands just because it's going to be harder to eat, and I'm just going to get some of those seeds that got jammed in there. And there you go. If you wanted to make a mixture of regular pasta, like a wheat pasta, and some of these zucchini noodles, that's also something you could do. I know sometimes for kids, it's hard to get them to eat just one vegetable. So having a mixture is a really great way, again, to incorporate some of these vegetables. And something also that is different about this recipe is that it's roasted. We are going to roast our zucchini noodles in a preheated oven. It is at 375 degrees. And so it's going to have a really nice flavor because it's going to get a little bit of that browning and caramelization. So you could see here again, really nice noodles. That watery core, I'm just going to separate it because it's a little bit too soft and mushy. And you can see here how this spiralizer is kind of separating that core. So I have plenty of noodles, so I'm just going to go ahead and show you the rest of this recipe, which is going to be really simple. And I like to use this bench scraper just to clean my surface here, my cutting board. And if you do have questions along the way, please feel free to ask. We definitely want to make sure we get to all of your questions. Now this is, again, really simple, very simple ingredients. We have the noodles here. We have some salt, some pepper here, a little bit of salt, and then some garlic cloves. So I am going to peel these garlic cloves and mince them. You could make the roasted zoodles and have, use any sauce that you like. So if you like a tomato sauce, you could do something like that. Or even just like a mozzarella cheese, you could also do that. I'm using some Parmesan cheese here also. But again, really simple. I think the main thing is to think about how in the summertime, incorporating the zucchini is just such a great way to add vegetables. And they're very hydrating. So anyway, here I have my garlic. Now, another tip for mincing is to use a garlic press. If you do have a garlic press, this is another great way to include kids at home, is just have them use the garlic press instead of using a knife, because that's going to require a little bit more work. So this is a lot of fun for kids. They usually really enjoy using this. I always take that peel off again before I use it. So some of that gets in here, and then I'm going to use more. Now, I do have quite a bit of noodles here, which is why I'm using more of the garlic. But if you don't like that flavor of too much of the garlic, then you can obviously use less. So I have my noodles here. And then I'm just going to add the salt, the pepper, the garlic, and some oil. So I'm going to use just a little bit of oil. I have some of my extra virgin olive oil here, about a tablespoon. And then you could use some tongs, or you could mix it with your hands. And again, getting, that your hands dirty, getting some of the older kids to do this task, it's a lot of fun. Just, if they can be in the kitchen and actually use their hands to toss this instead of any equipment. It's just fun, especially if they have, it feels different. If you want to expose them to different textures, different smells, this is a really great way to do that. So I have my noodles here that are ready, and then I'm just going to put them on a sheet pan that is lined with parchment paper and spread these out. Once it's out of the oven, what I'm going to do is add the Parmesan cheese and some basil. So this is going to be really simple, very simple flavors. But the great thing about it is that because they are simple, every ingredient is really going to come through, especially that fresh basil we're going to add afterwards, and this, just the freshness of the noodles. So this is it, really simple. I'm going to go ahead and put this in the oven.
While you're putting that in the oven, we have a question. So if you wanted to use something like carrots, could you put that in the spiralizer? Or if we were going to mix carrots and zucchini, would we need to roast them separately?
Yeah, that's a great question. And absolutely, you could use carrots in the spiralizer. It's going to require maybe a little bit more pressure because it is a denser vegetable, but you could do that. However, you would not cook them at the same time. You wouldn't mix them because the zucchini is more of that soft flesh vegetable. It's going to cook faster than something like the carrots. So the carrots, you could do it in a different sheet pan and let it cook longer. But yeah, you could use this spiralizer or a zoodle for any other vegetable like carrots. Beets work well also, the yellow squash. And it's really great. Sweet potatoes too. I've seen a lot of the sweet potato noodles also. But yeah, great way just to, again, incorporate the vegetables. So if you don't want to use the entire zucchini noodles, you could add them to a different type of pasta also. So while that's cooking, what I'm going to do is show you how to make some veggie sliders. like Melissa said earlier, the veggie sliders, they're plant-based, so they're not going to weigh you down the way maybe like a beef or a chicken slider will. And there's so much grilling going on in the summertime. So sometimes if there are vegetarian kids or some kids that don't necessarily want to eat meat, this is a really great option. It's easy to make. Again, a lot of, hands-on tasks that can be done with the kids. And it's going to be a really great source of fiber and protein because of the chickpeas. So I am going to go ahead and get started with that. The first thing to do is we're going to use a food processor to chop up some of the peas. And actually, before that though, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to use scallions. The recipes that you get, they do call for onions, but you could use scallions instead, or you could use a red onion, white onion, whatever you have at home, just to give this a little more flavor. So I do have some scallions that I'm going to chop up a little bit. I'm just going to take some of those greens off and then trim some of these ends as well. With these, because they are going to go in the food processor, I don't have to mince them as finely, but I just do want to cut them down a little bit so that they're not in big chunks. And I also like to take that outer layer off of the scallions when I use these. The white part is stronger, so we're going to use that. And then some of the lighter green part also we're going to be using. Okay. And so for something like this, because you're not doing, such a small mince, if an adult can do this, but also there are some tools for kids, and I can show you just an example of a knife that is intended for kids. You have a plastic knife that's serrated. It's pretty dull, so it's not going to be dangerous for them to use, such as a knife like this. But you can see here, if you use a sawing motion, it still cuts these. So using these types of tools for those, even the little ones, some of the kids that can be able to hold some knives, this is a really great tool to use for something like this, where you're using big pieces just to get it started. And again, getting them introduced to different tasks in the kitchen helps with their, fine motor skills and using something like this. So now that I have my scallions here that are chopped up, I'm going to take these to the food processor. And with our food processor, I have a can of chickpeas here that has been drained and rinsed under cold water, and some panko crumbs. If you don't have the panko, you could use a different type of breadcrumb. You could use maybe some saltines and crumble those up. So again, really depending on what you have in your pantry. And then what I'm going to do is pulse this.
And could you use different kinds of beans in there?
Yeah, so you could use like a black bean. You could actually use white bean, also like a northern bean or a cannellini bean for this. It would be a good swap and still be compatible with the flavors in the recipe. So I pulsed this about 5 times, and when I'm looking at it now, there are big chunks, which is good. We want some texture. We want some of those big chunks, and I'm just going to pulse it a couple more times. Okay, and this looks ready, so I'm going to pour this out into a bowl and show you what this looks like. Because this is, these are chickpeas, we don't want to process it so much that it becomes hummus. I think that's one of the things, that could go wrong with this, is that, you're processing it and then it becomes a smooth paste, which is the foundation of hummus. So here you can see that they're pretty big chunks, but the chickpeas have broken down, and already it's almost like a paste. So you could see that it already forms a patty. So this is perfect. It's exactly what we want. And to this, we're going to add an egg just to bind everything. We're adding an egg. If you wanted to make this, vegan, you could add a flax egg, which is when you get some flax seeds and put some water in there to make that gelatinous egg. So that could be an alternative if you want this to be vegan. Although there is some yogurt in this recipe, but again, you could use a plant-based yogurt if you wanted to. So I am going to add, again, about 2 tablespoons of Greek yogurt, and this is going to give it some moisture. The chickpeas themselves, they're a little bit dry, so we want a little bit more moisture in there. We're going to also season it with some pepper, some salt, some ground cumin, and ground coriander. The other thing you could do is add herbs. If you have some parsley or chives, that would be a really great thing to add to this. So we have all of our ingredients, and then we do have some olive oil also that we're going to add, again, just to get some moisture in here and some flavor. And the last thing to do is going to be adding some of the lemon juice, and we'll add that at the end. And so ideally, you would have the wet ingredients in a separate bowl and then mix them to the dry. But honestly, I just don't like getting so many dishes dirty, because then that's more work. So I put everything in the same bowl, and it's just easier for cleanup. And it's, this smells great with all of those spices. So this recipe could also be kind of turned like into a falafel. So if you like that flavor of the falafel, this is similar to that. And what I'm going to do is add some lemon juice. This calls for about a tablespoon, but you could definitely, just adjust it to your taste. And I like using a fork also just to squeeze the lemon. Just make sure that any of those seeds get removed first. And looks like there's one here. So again, really simple ingredients. This is going to hold well also. It's great to pack in lunch as well, and it's really flavorful. So again, very nice. A lot of the lemon, that citrus, it's just a really nice flavor. So now that I have these, I am going to start forming them into patties, and I'm just going to get this sheet pan so that I could put my patties in here. And this is, again, another great task for kids. They love getting their hands dirty, so forming some patties is going to be a lot of fun for them. You could use a measuring cup to get them started. If you don't have an ice cream scoop, using, a little measuring cup and then just getting it on your hands and starting to flatten them out. It's just something that's really easy you could do. These are going to be sliders. So I'm just going to get my little slider bun and make sure that it's the size of my bun, just so that everything's consistent, and it is perfect. So I have this here, and what we're going to do is heat up a non-stick skillet, and we're going to be cooking these. So these will not take long. What we're looking for is just some of the browning on the outside. The egg is the only thing that needs to get cooked here, so that will not take long at all.
We have a question, just going back to the zoodles quickly. What temperature did we set the oven at?
That is at 375 degrees.
Okay, and then on the skillet, are we going to do this like on a medium heat?
Yeah, so right now I have this at a medium heat. And the nonstick is the best for something like this, just because, with a stainless steel, it may stick a little bit. So we want to be gentle, but you can see how well these are holding up to. So this looks great. And yeah, you could use any kind of bean. You could use any of the other spices that you may like, if you like any of those blends. So one of the great things about this is that you can really make it your own and customize it to whatever flavor you like. Yeah, any
What I
more
like about this
questions?
is, well, just the size is also good, right? Because when you're making sliders, then they're kind of more kid-sized. And you don't have to worry about taking a giant burger or cutting it in half or something like that. It's, maybe a little bit more adjustable to different tummies and appetites.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and thanks for reminding me because you're absolutely right. The sliders are good, just in terms of your portion control. And sometimes, yeah, you give a kid like a full burger and they leave half of it, they take a bite. So this is just something that looks a little bit more appetizing and approachable. So I am going to put some oil in my pan, just a little bit. If you have one of those aerosol olive, olive oil or oil bottles, you could use that. For your nonstick pans, never use those nonstick sprays that are meant for baking because they will ruin your pan. So it's better to have just a little bit of oil to make sure that you get some nice browning on here and so that they don't stick. So my pan, I did have it on and it was heating up. So it looks like it's to temperature, and I'm just going to place one in here. And I could hear a little bit of a sizzle, but not as much as I want. So I'm going to leave it to heat up a little bit more. And while
Yeah.
those are cooking, oh, yes, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that watching you make those patties also reminded me of making homemade Play-Doh as kind of another fun kitchen thing that you can do with young kids. You can make it with just some things you have lying around the house, so like with some flour, salt, water, oil. I know sometimes you can put cream of tartar in there to kind of help it to hold together. And then you can use any kind of food coloring, right? And that's another way to kind of play in the kitchen. If you don't bake, it's something else that you can kind of do. So seeing you make
Yeah.
those patties kind of reminded me of also making that Play-Doh.
Yeah, you're right. And a lot of times kids, they just want to get their hands on something. So, yeah, if you're not cooking, but maybe just in the kitchen, I think that's a really great idea to just have them around and doing something around the kitchen table with family. Okay, so I have my pan and it's sizzling now, which is what we want. So I am going to leave these here for about 4 minutes on each side. It is medium-high heat right now. I want that nice browning on the bottom, and we're going to leave them and just let them be. I know sometimes we like to mix things around and see if poke and prod, but for something like this, I want a nice sear, although, like we think of a sear more for that steak or animal protein, but I still just want to get that nice color. So I'm going to leave these here for about 4 minutes. And then I'm going to show you what I have just to assemble them once the patties are ready. So I do have some of these slider buns. These are Hawaiian style. So, kids love that. And, they're, I know everyone's thinking, well, it should be a whole wheat bun. Maybe some of you are thinking that it should be a whole wheat bun, but I think these are a little more kid friendly, and we have some plant-based patties. So I think there's a good balance here with, introducing them to new flavors if they're not used to that, and having something that is familiar like this Hawaiian roll. And then your favorite spreads can go on here. If you like mayonnaise, mustard, the more traditional spreads, that could be great. I also have hummus. This is just some leftover hummus that we have that you could spread on there. on the bun, some lettuce leaves, and then a little bit more Greek yogurt. So this is Greek yogurt. There's some feta cheese in here that I had left over from something else that I'm going to show you later. And then I just seasoned it with some salt, pepper, and lemon juice. So again, really fresh, vibrant flavors. A little different than your standard mayonnaise, but that's what we're going to use once the patties are ready to assemble the little slider buns, or the little sliders rather. Okay, any other questions while our patties are cooking?
That is such a great tip of adding some of that leftover feta to the Greek yogurt. And I think adding that lemon is also going to give it some nice freshness that is different, that I think we could really use in the summer to lighten things up rather. I mean, mayonnaise is great, but if you're looking for maybe a little bit of a lighter flavor, I love that. Or that little bit of leftover hummus. I love those, are really great
Right.
ideas. What else might we be able to season if we wanted to do like a yogurt-based spread, like if we're using plain yogurt? What else might we use to kind of season that up and make it more on the savory side for a spread or a dip?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I mentioned before that the patties themselves, they're kind of like a falafel. So you could use a tzatziki dip. So get some cucumbers in there, maybe some dill, and use that also as your spread. And and maybe even use a pita. So you could just completely sort of rework this recipe and make more like a sort of falafel inspired dish. So yeah, like the cucumbers would be great. Honestly, even some of the zucchini, if you have some zucchini left over, you could put it in there, chop it up a little bit, and add some of that bulk. So sometimes that's what we're looking for when we're thinking about feeding vegetables to our kids. It's finding ways to incorporate it where it's not just a side dish that they may not eat.
Right. And this way it just kind of looks like tartar sauce, right? And that's something else that
Exactly.
a lot of kids are familiar with.
Yeah. Or a ranch. I know kids love the ranch, right? So you could make a ranch dressing that is yogurt based, and that's also something that's going to be good. Okay, so let's check our patties. I'm just going to check one, see how much color we have on there. It's looking good, but it still needs a little bit more. And then in the meantime, our noodles, it looks like they have just about enough time in the oven. So I am going to check those.
Yeah, and when
Okay,
we're looking
so
at
yeah,
how are they looking?
they're looking good, and I'm just going to get another oven mitt, and I will be showing you some of our zucchini. Now, what I forgot to mention, and now I'm remembering, is that zucchini does lose a lot of water. And so you're going to have much less than what you started with when you do get the zucchini out of the oven. So just think about that. When I put this in the oven, it was really, a mound of zucchini, but now it's much less. So you're going to need more than you think. But it's looking great. And for something like this, obviously with any heat, you want to just be careful. Make sure that, you're not having the kids do this. And I'm just going to show you over here on this camera how you got some nice color on these. There's some of that roasting, that caramelization, but you could see that it's much less than what we started with, and that's perfectly fine. You're just gonna, think about how much you may need for the amount of people you're gonna be serving. So I'm gonna let this cool down a little bit. And in the meantime, I am going to flip over these patties. And this is gonna probably require an adult to do this. There you go. So I kind of messed that first one up, but these others. You can see there's a nice color. And they smell great. Those spices, again, they're very fragrant. You could add cheese to this also, like a feta would go well with this. So you could add it to the patties themselves. And again, that's going to add a little bit more flavor. It is a little bit more salty though, so you would just make sure to, balance out the salt that you're going to be using. So while those are cooking, what I'm going to do is finish up our zucchini dish, and I'm going to be slicing some basil, chopping that up, and then we have our Parmesan cheese. So with this, one of the great things about the grating cheese is that it's really friendly task for kids. So I like to use a microplane, which is one of these cool little gadgets. I am a sucker for gadgets, but I actually think that this is one of the best ones out there because you could mince ginger, cheese, get the zest off the citrus. And for kids, something like this is a little bit safer than a box grater. Especially if you have the whole piece, you're just going to grate this and it comes out really nice. So we need about 1/4 cup, not too much. The Parmesan cheese, it's bold, it's salty, so it has just a great flavor. And you don't have to use as much. So again, good task for kids. But if you're concerned, one of the things that you could also use are knife gloves. These are knife gloves. They're meant to be for slicing, and you could see it's tiny for like a kid's hand. So I think these are really cute. And they do protect. So if you were to, use, a child was to use it, and they get close to this sharp part, it does protect them. It's also meant to protect against knife cuts, although we wouldn't want them using something sharp like this, but they do have some for adults. What it does not protect against are punctures though. So a puncture, it's not going to protect against that. But, using something like this to get them, give them a little bit more confidence, especially if they are concerned about using something sharp, you could use some knife gloves. The other thing that is great for kids is herbs. I know I used to teach a lot of kids cooking classes, and this is something they love to do, and they could just, stay in one place and just take the leaves off, which is something that sometimes I find a little bit tedious. But for kids, if you give them a task and tell them to take every single leaf off of a stem, they're really great at doing this. Basil, there's so much basil out right now in the stores if you have your garden. So it's such a great summertime herb. And we're going to use plenty just to make sure that we get a lot of flavor. When you're cutting basil, it does oxidize pretty fast. So it gets, that black color. It's still flavorful, but unfortunately it doesn't look as appealing. So you want to do this at the last minute that you're serving your dish. And for kids, you could have them just tear the basil, and that's something that they could do and then put it on their own bowl once they're done. But if if you want to do this as an adult yourself, or maybe some of the older kids have more knife skills, what you could do is a chiffonade, which is that ribbon cut. And the chiffonade is the best way to cut basil because you're going to get the least amount of oxidation, especially if you have a sharp knife. That's going to be really important. So I'm just going to stack my leaves here, and then these small ones I'm just going to leave for later, and just make a tight little roll. And with a sharp knife, I'm just going to slice these all the way through. You can see you get a nice little ribbon. So if you prefer this, you could do this. Otherwise, have some kids help you with the just tearing the leaves. And they really enjoy this also. So I'm going to go ahead and just go over here to my patties and see how they're doing. And these are done, so I'm going to turn off the heat. And we're going to just assemble these, and then I'll show you sort of like two of the different desserts that we have. And so the first thing I'm going to do is just get a bowl for my noodles. And show you how easy this is going to be. Any questions in the meantime?
Yeah, well, the knife gloves, I think that was a really, I didn't know that they even made those in kid sizes, so that's really good. And the other thing is about herbs. So what other kinds of herbs could we use in these kinds of recipes?
Mint would actually go really well with the zucchini. Mint pairs really nicely with this. Or you could do oregano. Chives also are going to be really nice. Even a thyme. Honestly, any of the fresh herbs that are out there right now are a really good option. And if you don't have fresh herbs, using a dried herb is fine too. You could actually add it to the roast, to the bowl before you roast the zucchini. Maybe like an Italian seasoning. If you don't have any of the fresh herbs, you could do something like that. And that's going to be a really nice flavor. So I
Yeah, and
have
when they're
my,
tearing the leaves, it smells really nice too, right? So they're engaging different senses as they're working with
absolutely.
the herbs.
Yeah, it's so fragrant. I wish you could be in here and kind of smell how fragrant it is. So I just put some cheese on here, and then I'm just going to get some of my freshly chopped basil and just give this a nice stir. And again, this is really easy, so very flavorful. And that's the key, I think, is just making sure that, you find ways to cook so that the ingredients really speak for themselves, and then also just all of the flavors really come through. So again, just gonna fix that little zucchini, but that's it. Very simple. And I feel like this just, when you see this, it's the highlights of summer when we think about zucchini and the basil and some lemon also. I would finish this with just a little bit of lemon to get some acidity out there so that it could bring out all of the flavor. So that's one that we have. And then let's assemble one of our veggie sliders. I'm just going to put this aside, clean up my station a little bit, put my basil over here, and then let's get one of our sliders. So for this one, what I'm going to use is this Greek yogurt dip. And again, it's a little bit chunky because I do have some of that feta cheese in here. And I do love feta, but since I had some extra, I just felt like it was the perfect opportunity to use it. And then my patty here, so you could see here how much color there is on this patty. They're good size, so nice thickness. We have really nice caramelization on there. I just have some lettuce leaves here that I separated. But if you wanted to have some, tomato, some onion, then you could definitely also do that. But again, really simple. And you could see here how, it's just such a great size for a kid. So I have some of these. And then for the next one, if you wanted to, use the hummus instead, we're going to do that. There are so many different flavors of hummus too out there. So if you wanted to use like a roasted red pepper type of hummus, that would be really great. Or even, gosh, I've seen some like everything bagel flavored ones. So there's so many out there. You could really be creative with this. And then just add your lettuce leaf. And we have some really easy sliders here. Okay, any questions?
Yeah, I love that we don't have to feel guilty about putting something on both sides of the bread. So we're not using butter and
Exactly.
jam. We're using something that's maybe a little more nutrient dense, that we could add to our to our burgers there, our sliders.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so the last thing that I'm going to show you is just some quick ideas for desserts. And that's going to be a Greek yogurt bark and some popsicles. So I like this recipe because it's super easy. So let me just show you what ingredients I have here. And it also seems like we're using a lot of yogurt today, but that's kind of the point. When you go to the store and you have ingredients and you think, well, how am I going to use this? There are so many different ways, right? You could use them for something like this, the bark that we're going to make, for the dips and spreads that you may eat with burgers or even some veggies. And that way you have different options for those ingredients that you're buying. Now, for something like this, I have some Greek yogurt here, and this is a berry medley. So these are frozen. There's blackberries, blueberries, and strawberries in here. I have some honey and some vanilla extract, and this is all going to go in a blender. So I'm going to put this in my blender along with the berries, and we're gonna process this until it's pretty smooth. You could leave it chunky if you wanted some of the chunks in your bark. So again, it's really preference. These have thawed out a little bit, so they'll be a little bit easier to process. And then I have my vanilla extract and some honey. You could flavor it with maple syrup if you wanted to also. Obviously I love berries, but sometimes the frozen berries are a little bit sweeter, so I do tend to use those quite a bit. So I'm just going to process this.
So if we were to use fresh berries, might we need to add a little bit of water or something like that?
No, that's a good question. And I actually used this earlier with fresh berries, and I did not add any water. So you could, you could use either. And then I have a baking sheet here, a rimmed baking sheet, and I am going to just pour this over. And I'm going to do half just to show you what you could do with the other part. And I'm just going to spread it out. It doesn't have to be, super thin, but since I'm using half, it's not going to fill up the entire sheet. And again, this is pretty much a smoothie. So if you didn't want to do the yogurt bark, the frozen yogurt bark, you could just keep it as a smoothie. And then I have some of that fruit that I'm just going to put on top here, some of those berries, and it's going to just look really pretty once it's frozen. So you could do something like this. You could use different fruits also, different combinations, something like a mango with coconut or even pineapple and coconut for kind of like a pina colada inspired flavor for the adults. And there's some mini chocolate chips here just for that sweetness also. A few of the chocolate chips. And you're going to freeze this at least 3 hours, preferably overnight. And with the other part, you could actually use something like a popsicle maker. So I have this popsicle maker here, and you could also make popsicles instead of the bark. So you would just fill these in with that same mixture. And one of the things I learned is that you have to fill it to the top so that the covers will be able to kind of connect. So you need the popsicle stick to be deep enough, otherwise it's not going to come out I recently learned that because you could see these have a gap since I didn't fill them half all the way through. But that's just something that is super easy that you could do. It's so refreshing for this time of the year. It's healthy. There's not as much sugar. And, with the berries are everywhere now, especially the fresh ones. So I like to take advantage of all of those fresh berries. But you have this two options here with the yogurt bark and then the popsicles also. So the one thing I will say is that you do have to let the yogurt bark thaw out a little bit before eating it. If you try to eat it straight from the freezer, it's a little bit icy and it's a little bit chalky. So definitely let it sit out for a few minutes to warm up, and then it's going to really melt in your mouth. I used sliced strawberries for this one, and there's still some chocolate chips. Or you could use the popsicles and make some of these at home. And again, all of these, especially with the desserts, they're really easy for kids to do. You can help them slice the strawberries. Really, really easy. So here's that. And then the last thing that I want to show you are just some different ideas on how to use other tools for kids so that they're, doing things at home. And one of the things I like to do are cut fruits in different shapes. So I have these little cutters that I like to use. And for something like this, we can make some skewers. So these have watermelon, mint leaves, and some feta cheese, and they're skewers. And you could even use some really cute type of picks so that they can eat more of those fruits, maybe a little bit of, just a little bit of protein with the cheese, but a different flavor. So I have these that I like to use. And what's fun is that they have a little hole on top for you to use so that you can just pop the fruit out. So these are little flowers, but you could use hearts if you wanted to. And you can make different types of skewers with different types of fruits. So I like the watermelon just because, again, it's in season right now. And when it's hot, you want something that's really hydrating. So there's nothing like that cold watermelon on a summer day where it's really refreshing and hydrating. And then this is also just fun for the kids when they can be able to use these little cutters. This is also another great tool for the kids to use because it cuts different vegetables and fruits into, like more of a crinkly type of shape. So I'm just going to set this aside. And you can see here how easy it is. They're not going to be holding anything with the blade. And then you just get that fun crinkly shape. So if they wanted to eat just a big chunk like that, that's something that's really easy when you're using these types of tools. And, for the skewers, if you didn't have any of these picks, you could just use a toothpick. And then I have my block of cheese here. And we could use our cutter also just to get that crinkly shape. And then some mint. Again, great task for the kids. Get some mint, fresh herbs. There's nothing like the fresh herbs to give. It really elevates the flavor of a lot of these foods. So there you go. Just some easy summertime skewers. And a different way to eat some of those foods that we really enjoy. So here are your skewers. Or you could just get the crinkle chunks of the watermelon. So
those
questions?
Look so good. Those look fantastic. I think that's also something you could do like for a party, for a kid's party. It could be an activity, or if you've just got the cousins over, or if your sister-in-law just dropped off a bunch of kids.
Yeah,
and you need something for them to do.
That's a great point. Yeah, it's a fun activity.
Yeah. What other fruits or things can we use with those cutters? What do you think that might be appropriate for?
Yeah, I would use like a cantaloupe or honeydew. That could really work well. For these cutters, you could use them for cucumber also, or like peppers, and it gets that nice, crinkle cut. Potatoes too. So yeah, different. Like you could really just be creative with these. But one of the things I like those cutters, you could also have something here that's a wooden type of cutter for kids. And again, it's just safer. It gets them into the kitchen a little bit with a little bit more confidence if they have the tools that are safe for them.
And then can you talk a little bit more about different types of tasks that kids can do in the kitchen? Especially for the younger ones, sometimes people are scared to kind of give them something to do, or, I don't know if you have any kind of other suggestions.
So mixing and stirring are great for the little ones, but even for the older ones, the chopping, when you have something like this type of knife, it's a really great way to get them engaged. But they could also add like ingredients into bowls. They could measure them out, so they could help you measure using measuring cups and measuring spoons, so that they again start learning more about math. Also, they can help you with that. They can crack eggs into bowls. So for the patties, they could do some of that also.
Yeah, that's a great point about the math. My son challenged me and asked me like how many tablespoons were in a half a cup. And I said, you know what? Let's find out. Let's measure
Yeah.
some water.
Definitely. So I know we're a little short on time, but I just wanted to recap what we made today. We have the sliders, so with your different favorite spreads that you want to use. We have some of the zucchini noodles here also. And then our dessert is that frozen Greek yogurt bark with strawberries or a popsicle. So using that same mixture, you could either make that bark or make some popsicles. And then just as something fun, another fun activity is using fruit and making some skewers or just putting it on toothpicks so that it's a little bit more interesting for the kids. And then remember, just incorporate some of these different types of tools that you can really find them anywhere, and it makes it much more enjoyable for them. Just remember always, washing hands is really important. Maybe getting some gloves. If you're not sure, you could use gloves, but think about also constantly washing your hands. Any questions? Any last minute
Yeah.
questions or comments?
I'm so glad that you mentioned the hand washing. That's the one thing that I also teach, that the first step to any recipe is washing our hands, right? So making sure that we're kind of doing that. And I think sometimes then just having some kitchen towels or something available for the kiddos to wipe their hands on so they don't do this, or maybe having some aprons.
Yeah, the aprons, right. And then also, if they're tasting, that's fine. We want to encourage them to taste as they go, but then wash their hands. Because I know sometimes I see kids tasting and then they go right back in there, right? So, which is fun. And if it's at home, maybe it's not a big deal, but just so that they learn when they're, cooking for other people, that's always something that's really important.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Okay, so if there aren't any other questions, let's see. Okay. If that's the case, then we can, I guess, skip over to the end. So we want to thank everybody for attending today's webinar. The recording, slides, and resources mentioned, including those wonderful recipes, will be posted on msdcenter.org, along with information about upcoming webinars. And you will also receive a follow-up email with the links to all of these. So we want to thank you again so much for joining us today. We hope we'll see you next time and enjoy the rest of the summer.
Thank you.